I have been searching.
Welcome to Following the Fire, a podcast for Christians who are rethinking their faith and need a safe place to doubt. As we wander through the spiritual wilderness, we want to find and follow God wherever the pillar of fire leads.
And just like God's people in the Bible, we get lost, we miss the point, and we don't have all the answers. But maybe that's okay. We're on this journey together. I'm Nathan.
And I'm Steve.
But even on my heart can't compare with what you're worth.
Hey everybody, welcome to another Following the Fire book club. I love all of these, but I'm especially stoked. We're going to be talking about Heavy Burdens by Bridget Eileen Rivera. And we have her here. Really excited to talk about the book, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But we have Bridget here. Bridget, say hello. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, yeah. So my name is Bridget Eileen Rivera, and I am the author of Heavy Burdens. And I do a lot of advocacy for LGBTQ people in the church. I grew up in conservative evangelicalism in the homeschool movement specifically. And so I guess making Christian communities a healthy place for LGBTQ people to grow up in is something that's really important to me. That's very near and dear to my heart. I'm currently getting my PhD in sociology and teaching college level classes in sociology here in New York. And I generally am, I guess, excited to talk with you guys today about LGBTQ stuff and making the church a better place.
Thank you so much. Really honored to have you on. How close to the end of the doctorate? Should we just call you Dr. Rivera?
No.
Not yet?
Not yet,
jinx
so
it?
I wish. Yeah, don't jinx it.
All right, sorry.
I actually am just now entering what's called level 2. Basically, I need to complete my orals, which, like, once I complete my orals, then I will be eligible to submit my dissertation proposal, at which point I will be a doctoral candidate. So I'll have reached candidacy. So I'm like right before that stage right now. And
well, that's exciting. Yeah.
Yeah. Trying to take it one step at a time and not get too overwhelmed.
Yeah.
But you thought you'd just take a break and write an entire book along the way, or?
I did decide to write a whole book during my PhD. It was quite overwhelming, I have to say. I didn't quite know what I was getting myself into beforehand because this is my first book. And I think if I had known, I would not have done it. But you know what? Ignorance is bliss. And the book got written. And I am just grateful that I'm still alive.
Wow. Well, I'm extremely impressed. I barely could write papers when I was going to school, and I was just a bachelor. So sounds like your advice to people who are thinking about writing a book is like, no, you don't know what you're getting into. Maybe that ignorance is a good thing. So I'll talk about the book real quick. It's Heavy Burdens. The subtitle is 7 Ways LGBTQ Christians Experience Harm in the Church. Out now wherever books are sold. You can also get it at bakerpublishinggroup.com. Also, by the way, Bridget, you're on all the socials and you've got a blog as well, right?
Yes, I am on Twitter and Instagram as well as Facebook. My handle is Traveling Nun, and my blog is Meditations of a Traveling Nun. And I primarily use that as a space to engage with current things happening in evangelical denominations around LGBTQ issues. and to, provide context and framing and hopefully better perspectives where perspective is lacking. So, yeah, my blog, Meditations of a Traveling Nun. So you can find me at all those places.
Awesome. All right. So this book, Heavy Burdens, I attended for a long time a church that had a sign that said this, and that on the website said this. So I know there's a lot of people who have similar experiences. Here's just one example. The statement that on my church's website said, "We don't pretend to be perfect, and we don't expect you to be either. We'd love it if you joined us for worship or to study God's Word. Everyone is welcome. We'd love to get to know you." And when I look at that statement, I'm filled with emotions, because I think, man, what a great ideal to strive for. But I also wonder, man, what kind of a trap are we setting for people who may walk through the doors and don't quite know what they're getting into in that group, or kind of where the people are.
Yeah.
And but it's the root of it is true. It's this ideal that many Christians really strive for, and I feel like this book is an attempt to help Christians and churches like mine to live up to that ideal that they have. And at work, at my job, I specifically have, my job is to point out problems. Our company encourages people who can find weaknesses that we have or blind spots, because you can only get better if you can first see the problem and then take ownership of it, acknowledge your faults. That's kind of where you have to start and to move on.
So true.
And so this book, it's kind of hard though when you talk about problems. I don't like that, but it's writing from the inside and saying, here are some problems maybe that you haven't thought about if you're part of the dominant culture. And it lays out 7 really thoughtful and convicting and revealing burdens that Christians who want to live up to this ideal of everyone is welcome, or who follow a Christ who is, the savior of the downtrodden and who cares about the least of these, it points out some ways that the church maybe is actually accidentally not only not a refuge, but actually causing some harm for the people among us who are LGBTQ, like our kids, but also just the world watching us, the people on the outside. And a really convicting part of this book, you talk about the 99 and the 1, where Jesus makes it clear that who God cares about is that one lost sheep, and that it really does matter how we as Christians, we as Christ followers, treat the least of these, including that one sheep instead of the 99, the outsider sheep. I'm so thankful for this book. I really can't wait to talk more about it. And I would just encourage Christians and churches and church leaders to take a look at this book, take it seriously. It's filled with personal anecdotes, statistics, and scripture to make a case for maybe a better way that we can serve LGBTQ Christians in our midst.
And one thing I'll just add to that, because I know that a big thing with a lot of books on LGBTQ issues in Christianity is that Christians can often be hesitant to read them because they don't want to be led astray by what's often seen as liberal, progressive, leftist theology. And I know that's definitely been me in the past, is no, I can't read that because, the enemy is going to use that to tempt me to believe lies or, something to that effect. And so one of the things that I really try to prioritize in the book is to not center trying to convince people of one position or the other on same-sex marriage. Whether you believe in same-sex marriage, whether you don't believe in same-sex marriage, I really tried to write a book that is for both sides, where it actually doesn't matter what you believe. Regardless of what you believe, these things are nevertheless the reality. These things are nevertheless things that need to be changed. And I think that's important because I hope that provides I guess, an in for people to feel less scared, because I'm not going to be trying to convince you to believe in same-sex marriage. And in fact, something that people might not realize about me who are just getting to know me, or maybe are not familiar with my work, is that I actually myself have a traditional view of marriage. So I believe that marriage is defined in scripture as between a man and a woman for the purpose of procreation. That is a doctrine that I follow, and something that I personally believe is very important in how I live my life. And as a result of that, I am celibate. And so, I myself have a traditional perspective when it comes to this topic. And I think that's important because I think a lot of people assume that when LGBTQ people are speaking on this topic, they're speaking from this very like leftist, raw, tear down everything, and we're gonna remake like all of the church into something else. And that's, really not the case. LGBTQ people come from a spectrum of belief on theology, on marriage and sexuality. Some people affirm same-sex marriage, others don't. Many are in a place of confusion and trying to figure it out and not knowing. And I think that's important because a lot of people don't realize that queer people in the church are in the same like place of trying to figure it out, and not a monolith in what their beliefs are, which is not necessarily always appreciated.
Yeah, I do appreciate how you approach that in the book and made it accessible to folks on both sides of the aisle on that one, and how the things that like the 7 burdens you go through. I mean, it's like I feel like when we get into this topic, I think it's kind of what you're saying. We get hung up on the marriage thing, and it goes no further. It's like, well, hold on, there are still people out there, regardless of their opinion on marriage, they're experiencing harm in the church, and let's talk about that, and
Yeah.
let's table the marriage thing or the sexual relationships thing for now, and let's talk about the fact that these are people that are loved by God and who love God and who are being harmed.
Yeah, exactly. And what I often find with books of this nature is that, like you said, the focus is on theology, and there will usually be a part of the book where they kind of talk about how this, like, it's important to remember the people at the heart of this issue and that we have to be
Yeah.
sensitive to their needs. But it's always like a quick aside, like, let's make this comment so that we can get back to the theology, the real meat. And to me, the heart of the issue is people, because that's ultimately the end game of this, is the effect that all of this has on how people are following Jesus, and what their lives are like. And I share this statistic at the start of my book. For most people, for actually the majority, I think actually all demographics measured in this particular study, for all demographics, they found that religious involvement reduces the risk of suicide. So the more heavily involved in your faith, the less likely you are to consider suicide and commit suicide. And this was true for every demographic they measured except for LGBTQ people. For LGBTQ people, the more involved they were in their faith, the more seriously they took their faith, the more likely they were to not just consider suicide, the more likely they were to attempt suicide, and the more likely they were to die by suicide, which is just astonishing that religious involvement would play a role in making all people's lives better, except for LGBTQ people. For whatever reason, religious involvement is pushing queer people to death. And
Well, that's
that's
so sad.
startling. It's,
Yeah.
yeah, it's extremely startling. And, that to me is what Christians need to be grappling with. Why? Why is that
Yeah.
the case? Why is that happening? We've got to figure it out because people's lives are at stake.
Yeah.
And when you think of, you know, it should be intuitive, but why is that a problem for Christians to consider? And I think it goes without saying that we are maybe fostering an environment that does that. But any problem that you have to deal with alone, or that is unmentionable, or that is full of shame, you can't tell your wife, or you can't say it out loud. Like any problem that people struggle with, the first thing you're supposed to do is share it and get a community around you to help you with your alcoholism, or with your, depression, or with your chronic disease, or whatever it is. And it's the people who bottle it up and have that deep, deep, deep shame, so deep that they can't say, "Mom, can you help me?" Those are the people fighting on their own. And I think that, speaking of unmentionable problems, I grew up kind of thinking, and maybe my culture or my church accidentally kind of assumed the same thing, I think, which is that, like, gay people are out there. Like, gay people are who you see in, like, pride parades, and they live in, New York City and Amsterdam, and they they look like this, and it's like, it may as well be an alien species. Like, it's like not even us and them. It's like, I can't even imagine that. And I think that a starting point for us is acknowledging, or even asking the question, like, what if there are maybe some gay people in this building? Or like, what if my kid, or what if, like, who in my youth group that I grew up with was struggling with this, and I made jokes about it, or I talked like, yeah, they're all outsiders with an agenda, So how many churches do you think, like, need to reckon with this because of the people inside the building who we don't know that we're talking about?
Everyone. There is not a church in existence unless, like, the church is like 4 people and, like, the likelihood is low. A church with an average number of members, there's not a single one that does not have queer people in the congregation. They are there, they are present, and you have spoken to them. They might be your friend. Yeah, they might be your child. They might be your spouse. They might be your elder or a deacon, and it is not just, there won't just be one hiding there. It'll be many. There, you will have many queer people in the congregation. And in most conservative churches, these people will never come out. Why? Because the social cost is so high in these communities. And so it 100% is a very isolating experience. It's something that many will just keep to themselves, hide at all costs, never tell a single soul. And as a result of keeping this very secret, they keep themselves very secret, because in order to hide this part of yourself, you have to hide everything about yourself. Otherwise, people will figure it out. So you have to, like, put on an act all the time, and, be behaving a certain way, and, masking your speech, and being careful, not to sound a certain way, not to look a certain way, to dress the right way. And, it becomes extremely, extremely overwhelming, very isolating, and it builds up over time, and is very difficult in terms of, very difficult emotionally, very heavy cost in terms of mental health. And this is one of many reasons why the mental health outcomes for queer people that are heavily involved in religious communities is so poor, because there is such a heavy cost to being queer in a conservative evangelical church.
The rain is falling hard on this dusty ground. And I got no way of knowing what will grow.
You talk in the book directly and indirectly about the double standards of holiness and forgiveness and all these aspects of that straight people just think it's just how things are, but then it comes to suddenly, oh, you're gay, well, suddenly I have a different set of rules for you. Can you talk about that and how that impacts things?
Yeah. A big way that plays out is when it comes to questions about sexuality. Straight people are really allowed a lot of space in churches to ask questions, to figure things out, to explore. Even if you're a straight guy who struggles with porn, it's largely seen as totally normal. And like you go to like a men's group, a men's support group where you can like talk about it and, share, help each other, share support with each
Right.
other. If,
Like nobody thinks this
someone,
is a good thing, but they're not surprised that it's happening because it's
You don't get kicked
yeah,
out.
yeah,
you
you
don't
don't
get
get
kicked out.
you don't get kicked out over it. And if someone's trying to figure out what they believe about divorce and remarriage, is it okay? Is it not okay? Is it one of those things that's bad, but God forgives it? Like, these are questions that are allowed. For the most part, straight people in evangelical churches are allowed to ask questions. They're allowed to figure things out. They're allowed to struggle. All of these things are considered okay, considered normal, an expected part the of your walk with Christ as you're growing in the process of sanctification. This is part of it. But for queer people, there's no room for that whatsoever. You have to toe the line. There are no questions that can be asked. There is no thing that can be struggled with. There is nothing that you could explore or figure out along the way. There is no room for differences of opinion. It's this way or the highway. It's you believe what the pastor says, or you are kicked out of the church. You're not a member anymore because you're living in sin. And in fact, maybe you're not even a Christian anymore. And, there's so many stories, people that I know personally, friends who have just been through absolutely humiliating things in churches where they were picked out from the pulpit in the congregation, and made to stand up in front of the entire congregation and
You're
confess
kidding.
that they were queer and living in sin. People who were escorted out of the church upon speaking to an elder about some of the questions that they had. And the thing is about this, people hear stories like this and they think, how can this be? This is so shocking. And the fact is that this goes on, and this is characteristic of the situation in evangelical churches. It's not an exception. It doesn't just happen in one or two places here and there, but like your church is a really good church. This would never happen there. In fact, it might and probably has happened there already. Um,
Yeah.
this is a characteristic of how things are. I've, had friends that have even like upon discussing some of their struggles in a men's group, a week later gotten death threats in the mail that were anonymous, so nobody knows who it was.
Ugh,
But and so like
it's
these things are
heartbreaking.
going on. It's happening all the time. It is not just an exception, it is characteristic. I do not have a single queer friend who does not have multiple traumatic stories to tell from their time in various churches. Not a single one. And you have to really go hunting to find someone that doesn't have a negative experience. And more often than not, there's someone who came to faith later in life, and so they didn't have time to have a negative experience. And yeah, this is when we talk about changing things, this is the type of stuff that needs to be changed. And it's more than just, people learning to not be homophobic anymore. It's coming to a place where we can see that there are specific things that are being taught in churches. There are specific ways of thinking and mindsets that are being inculcated in the culture and in the way people think about the world that are producing this type of atmosphere. It's not just about you deciding that you're going to be okay with queer people and you're going to love them. This is a culture that exists. This is an atmosphere that exists, and it exists because of things that are being taught, mindsets that are entrenched in people, that need to be changed, that need to be shifted. Otherwise, things will not change.
I love how you say marginalized cultures get scrutiny, extra scrutiny. Mm-hmm. We spend all our time scrutinizing marginalized cultures, and the dominant culture goes unexamined.
Yeah.
And it's so that's such a great nugget of wisdom, but it is so hard to see when that is happening, especially if you're in the dominant culture. And I truly believe that we actually need the benefit of people who are not in the dominant culture. The burden is that its life sucks for a long time because they're feeling that tension of, man, I'm not in the mainstream of whatever it is. This can be a number of things, right? If you speak a different language, or if you came from a different state, or whatever, you're going to notice the things the dominant culture is doing that the dominant culture cannot notice about itself. Just you can't. You're all the fish going the same direction. It takes a fish that's going a different direction to even notice it. And I feel like the importance of that cannot be overstated, because it is precisely our unexamined state that has caused this culture to be allowed to, right? Because our churches, we want to be like Christ, and we even believe that Christ has the answer for X, for whatever the thing is, right? That there's a life, an abundant life waiting for that person. And what we don't see is that we are closing all of the gates that would even give them a chance to get there. I went to a Bible Belt Church of Christ affiliated college, and it's so funny because I was in I was their core demographic. I was definitely mainstream all the way down the middle. And when I look back, things that I didn't notice, but that I know in retrospect, are that I had, a dozen LGBTQ friends while I was going there who were in various stages of struggling with their families or with themselves or with the school, which would kick them out if they found out, including, right, two of my suite mates got kicked out, freshman or sophomore year, out of the school. And so you look at that, and then maybe a couple gets pregnant, right? And you'd see maybe that the guy gets to keep going to school, and maybe the girl drops out or gets kicked out.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of an example of wait a minute, where are we pointing our focus? And as I exited that system, I had been surrounded by what I thought were a lot of straight Christian, 99.999% white, people exactly like me. And like a neighborhood away, I started working at a restaurant where I was the only straight person.
That's
And
great.
and so suddenly I was a minority. I had I got that job by desperately like walking place to place and handing out resumes. And my resume says ex Christian University on it, So like people know wherever I go that I've got some kind of affiliation with Christianity. And man, at first I thought everybody hated me. I didn't quite know what was going on, but man, I was getting all of this like scorn feeling. And it took a couple of weeks for me to realize like these people all have strong defenses up because I came in and now they know that they've got one of these people that they're literally having trauma responses. It turns out, and after you work with me for 2 or 3 weeks and then people feel pretty safe and, start making fun of me and stuff. And each one of them, because this was the Bible Belt, every single one of them had a painful story about their families or their hometowns or where they came from. And they were all Christian. They all had grown up Christian. Their pain and their kind of that initial reaction they had against me was they were expecting this culture of like whatever that is to continue in a place that they kind of thought was a safe space. All that to say, this is why I think this book is so important, because we really do miss some of the things we're doing on accident. We're well-meaning people, but this is happening because of what we're not doing, because we're not turning and facing this.
Yeah.
And
So true.
I feel like there's a practical approach that we apply to heterosexual sin or to heterosexual, complicated relationships, and we'll kind of apply them unequally to people who are straight than we do to people who are gay.
Yeah.
And I think it starts with like the desire to stop actively harming these people, that we're accidentally harming.
Yeah, 100%. And I think a lot of that has to do with taking time to sit back and learn, because I think there can be sometimes a mindset of we know what the harm is that we're doing, and so therefore we can just stop doing it. But the thing is that Christians by and large don't know. That's why the harm is happening. It would take a really sadistic person to like know the harm that they're doing and continue doing it.
Yeah.
And
Right.
most Christians and most churches are not bad people. They're well-intentioned. They love Jesus. They want to do what's right. They love people. Like, we're not talking about, anyone who's intentionally harming others. The harm that's being done is not understood. It's invisible to people. They don't realize what they're doing. They don't know what the harms are. And so when people hear that they, need to, be more welcoming, create a healthier atmosphere for LGBTQ people, a lot of times the response is, oh, okay. And immediately they're like on their guard for the next gay person to come in so they can be ultra loving and like ultra nice to them and ultra welcoming. And like, I mean, maybe that's good. At the same time, it can be a little awkward. And at the end of the day, that doesn't actually fix the actual things that are going on, the actual issues that are causing the harm. Again, because people don't know. It's something that people are ignorant of, and that's why it's happening. And so, it takes a lot of humility to step back and be like, okay, I don't understand this. This is something that I'm ignorant about. I need to step back and I need to learn so that I can move forward without harming other people.
Please don't turn away. Please don't hide your face.
Yeah, I've been like multiple generations back in my family, part of the Church of Christ, Churches of Christ, however you want to call it. And I got my degree from a Bible college in Bible, trained as a missionary. I was a missionary in Germany, all this stuff. I assume that I know what's going on with people. And I assume that I know the harm, like you said, the harm that I'm doing or not doing or whatever. And there's so much assumption. I feel like we just need to start with humility, that I don't know what's going on. And in the life of an LGBTQ person, I don't know what they're experiencing. And that's one reason I like how you even just name the book, like these are burdens that we're putting on people. Because I think you're right. Christians don't want to be hateful. Mm-hmm. They don't want to be suppressing, but it happens because we don't pay attention. We're not asking questions like of you, like we're not asking questions about like what am I doing that's messing things up. And in my personal life, we mentioned before we started recording about how Churches of Christ generally do not have women participating in anything, in any leadership positions or anything in worship, etc. And I was the head of worship for years at our congregation, and my wife was the head of the children's education. And I didn't even put together the harm that was being done to her just by the passive not allowing her to be and do things in church. And so I'm glad for voices like yours that are kind of showing, here's what's going on. Like, pull back the curtain a bit. And I've talked to some people about this general topic in the recent past, and it seems like some people's initial response is to want to be like, they want to be passive in some ways. It's like, so, okay, we get these problems, so let's just stop doing those bad things. But inactivity is not the same as changing hearts and minds and changing the way things work. So I guess I'm not. I thought I had a question in there, but other than like, how do we fix it, Bridget? Other than like read your book, it's like step one, knowing is half the battle, right? But
And, I do try to kind of outline some steps, kind of point a path towards change in my book, specifically in the final section, where I kind of present some broader principles that need to be laid down first, like some foundational things that can then be built upon. And, we don't have time to go into them all, but I think to speak to that, I think a lot of people feel like it's impossible to create that kind of church because their theology is just incompatible with what LGBTQ people want. And I just don't think that's true. And I have heard from a number of LGBTQ people that attend conservative churches that have told me that they love their church, that it's their family, and that they have found it to be incredibly life-giving for them, and that they are grateful to have found it because they themselves have a conservative theology, and it's extremely difficult to find that kind of church that is also a safe place to grow in your faith when you're a queer person. And those churches right now are few and far between, but they exist. And so I think 100% to what you said, you can't take a passive approach to this. You have to be active. And there are a number of groups that, provide training on this, that, provide resources to make this happen. And so, it takes stepping forward, taking initiative, to bring change. Because if you just sit back, nothing's going to change. It's just going to continue the way it is. I mean, the
Hmm.
law of inertia. Um,
Yeah.
your church is going to keep on going the way it's been going unless you put the brakes on and turn in a different direction and go that way instead.
I think again that I'm so thankful for the first, the 80% of the book. The first part is just helping to give people who may not have experienced it themselves or may be blind to it that ability to empathize a little bit and to kind of see the dominant culture from the outside. And something that really stood out to me when you move towards, what would a welcoming, Christ-centered place look like that doesn't cause this harm? Like, is there a life that, is there something in Christ that is for these people, right? And because we believe all theologically, yes, there is. How can we get to that? And it reminds me actually of my personal story. I found myself pregnant, right? I got someone pregnant. I was not in a relationship. I kind of was barely going to church. And so I had to approach a community with this shame that I had, and knowing kind of what what my family was going to think, and what my all these people, I knew what the right thing was and what the wrong thing was, right? And there were kind of two reactions that I remember specifically to when I started asking for help. One started with, "Have you repented?" And I didn't really think much of it. And the answer I said was yes, but in reality, I was like straight in the middle of this really difficult, hard part of my life. Like, have you repented? It was kind of a meaningless question for me, but it was, in retrospect, kind of the price of admission to the next part, which was like, yeah, here's what we're going to do. It was kind of a gate, like, well, you've got to fix this, and then you're kind of allowed back. And that sometimes that kind of stuff, rules and barriers or laws or tough love, can help people, I think. I don't know what would have helped me at that time. But what I remember just broke me was when someone said, hey, when you fall again, and you probably will, get back up. We're here for you. It did not make my like current moral state the price of admission. It was like, hey, we're here. We're here. We're a family. We support you. And that's hard enough already. There are families who, hide that their daughter got pregnant from their church because of the shame associated with that we would benefit from, fixing, and letting people. But when we think about, okay, I'm an elder, I'm a pastor, I'm a deacon, and someone comes to me with this thing, are we willing to like sit with them? Like how can we support Christians who subscribe to who want to live a life of celibacy? Right? Do we have structures to, if we have extremely conservative theology, are we willing to also back that up and help those people? Right? If we say you can't remarry to a divorced couple, would we help out the two people? Or how do we support these people and not just ask them to live?
What would that look like?
Yeah, exactly.
You talk about it in the book about creating that community to support. Yeah. What would that look like for folks who haven't read it yet?
Yeah, well, I think before building a community that is supportive of celibacy, there's kind of a prerequisite to that, which is making and allowing celibacy to be a choice that a queer person is able to make. Because what happens in a lot of Christian communities is, in order to be a part of the community, you have to be celibate. And if you're not celibate, then you have no chance of being a part of the community. And so the first step is getting rid of this idea that celibacy is I guess, the entrance fee, if you will, to being part of Christian community. because it's not the entrance fee for being a child of God. Um, we don't save ourselves by how sexually pure we are. We are saved through the grace of God, through faith in Jesus Christ. And when we create this situation where queer people need to be celibate in order to be a part of Christian community, we are putting upon them a different gospel than the gospel that we ourselves embrace for ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the first thing when it comes to having a community where celibate queer people can find life, is giving them the freedom to come to a choice that you might disagree with, because it's only by realizing that you can't lose the community that you have, that your choice to be celibate is a product of freedom now, instead of bondage. And, this is just a basic principle of psychology.
Mm-hmm.
When you force people to think a certain way, people are more likely to reject that mindset. When you give people the choice and the ability to think for themselves, people are way more likely to pick a choice that you actually agree with. And so, people, hear the idea like, oh my gosh, we have to give gay people the freedom to, read the Bible and decide their theology for themselves and decide whether or not they think they need to be celibate. Oh my gosh, how could we do that? And it's like, okay, well, let's think. If you try to force people to think the way you do, way fewer are going to be likely to come to that conclusion, because this is, again, basic human psychology. The more you push things on people, the greater of a prison it becomes for them, the more likely they are to reject it. And so, if the goal is to make celibacy life-giving, if the goal is to have more queer people choose celibacy, then you got to kind of step back and take the pressure off a little bit and recognize that this is not a salvation issue. And this is not an issue that God rejects people over. And so this should not be an issue that Christian communities reject people over. And that in and of itself is really radical, because there is this assumption that when you sin sexually, and sexual sin is typically defined as anything that is outside of your own beliefs on sexual ethics. That's how people see sexual sin. Um, so, there's this idea that if you are a sexual sinner, then you're not a real Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And well, I mean, that's just not true. We all sin in various different ways. And the truth is that all of us understand the boundaries of sin differently. All of us are growing in our understanding of Scripture, growing in our understanding of God's expectations upon us. And who we are today is not the same person we were 20 years ago. And in fact, the person we were 20 years ago probably embarrasses us. And so, we have to, again, the grace we give for ourselves, we have to be willing to give it to others, and recognize that, the Christian life is not this life that is defined by lines and boundaries. It is defined by growth, by a walk. It's a journey with Christ. It's not this, straight jacket falling in line. It's a process, and that process has to be embraced. So, yeah, that's
Wow.
that's the first thing that I would say.
So you're saying that if your church's goal is to allow a safe space for celibate people, don't kick out two women who are married.
Yeah.
Like, be part of their lives too.
Yeah, let them be part of the community too.
Yeah, and even if your church is more open to the idea of same-sex marriage, you need to still provide that, on the other side, provide that safe space for people who want to remain celibate based on their ethics.
Exactly. On both
Don't
sides.
force either way, yeah.
And, speaking to the other side, I have spoken to friends who are celibate who do sometimes feel this pressure from progressive communities to, you know, be in a relationship, get married, and do feel a kind of shame around being celibate. And yeah, that principle goes for both sides. Both need to be accepted as choices that queer people can come to as a result of genuine and authentic searching of God's word and coming to their own conclusions about what the Bible is saying, and recognizing that this is part of the Christian walk and giving space for that.
Wow. That's very good advice. It makes me think of I tried to think like, why is this so difficult? Because I think the intuitive thing is like, yes, we absolutely are going to make this the price of admission, even though theologically or from scripture, we understand that sanctification comes from walking with Jesus. It's not the first step, right? You have to be, the messy version of you that doesn't know Jesus first, and you walk with Jesus, and then, Jesus is going to call you to be who you need to be. We know that theoretically, and we apply it in some situations. And we also know that, like, Paul rejects this living to the flesh, which is the sin, guilt, shame cycle of just trying to be good so that we can walk with Jesus, right? And I think ultimately what it comes to is we are afraid to be seen as accepting of sin, which kind of betrays the fact that we don't see ourselves as sinners.
Yes.
It's like, wait a minute, people are gonna think that we let sinners go here. It's like, yeah, who do you think goes there? Who's in your church? If it's not full of like 100% a bunch of sinners, you're inflating. You think you are better. You think that you did it, and then Jesus was like, "I'm so glad you're on my team," instead of like, "I'm a sinner in need of grace, and I can't do it on myself." Peter had to learn how to recognize the spirit in people that he thought he was literally supposed to reject because of Leviticus. And you talk about a difficult thing that we need to grapple with is like, people are going to have their convictions about what is a godly Christian Jesus type sexual ethic. And that's something worth exploring, and it's something you can be convicted of. So how do we develop the muscle to stand by our convictions and allow space for the Spirit working in others who are coming to completely different conclusions?
Yeah, 100%.
Joy in the air that fills my lungs. I'll find joy in the air that fills my lungs. I'll find joy in the air that fills my lungs. Because you've been good to me.
Thank you so much for the book. Thank you for just the grace and empathy that you have for the people who are afraid to read this kind of book, or who are, you know what I mean? We as dominant culture people, whoever that means, we need this kind of voice constantly. And I pray that people are open to this kind of thing. I pray that when I'm 80, that whoever's telling me something that I can't believe that they're going to say, I hope that I'm open to that then as well.
Yeah. And I'll say again, thanks for the way that you approach the whole thing. I was very, very caring and very warm-hearted toward the people who are struggling with this idea in general. Because so many people that I know, and it was me like a couple years ago, a lot changes, but it's hard. It is scary to open up a book about LGBTQ issues and Christianity, because, like you said, like this may be taking me places I don't want to go.
Mm-hmm.
And
so true.
So thank you for approaching it that way, and so showing how we can be more loving to people that, oh, by the way, they happen to be, different sexual orientation, but you still love them. So
Yeah.
thank you for that.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. So thank you for your kind words. And I am hopeful that the book can open hearts and minds and hopefully, start some much needed conversations in church communities.
Yep.
Again, I appreciate it so much. I hope you get to go back to being a traveling nun soon. Is that...
Yeah, were you actually a nun?
No, I was not. The name comes from feeling like a lot of my callings in life are, have a lot of parallels to the monastic life, but I'm nevertheless not in the monastic life. But
Right.
I mean, maybe you could say that I am. I don't know. Like Protestantism doesn't really allow for an outlet for that. And then the traveling part comes from just feeling like I'm in a journey and walking through this one day at a time kind of thing. So, yeah.
Oh, good. That's a thing that COVID can't put to a stop. Still on a journey, even if you can't go to Puerto Rico.
Yes.
But it only takes a whisper.
Hey, thanks for listening. We hope you got something out of the episode today. Check the show notes in your podcast app for all the links and references that were made, or you can find it all at followingthefire.com. If you'd like to support the show, please go to patreon.com/followingthefire to become a patron. And of course, we'd love it if you rate the podcast and share it with others. See you later.
With what you're worth.